Welcome again to Global Money Talk. We're delighted to have Sean Farrell, who's the head of digital asset strategy for Fundstrat, and to talk about the crypto space and and what are the opportunities and risks given the dislocation in the markets right now. So Sean, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you again.
Thanks for having me.
I want to talk a little bit about all the huge dislocation that we have had in the last week, brought down and drawn down with the rest of the markets. But I mean, Bitcoin had held pretty well. Drew down under 80,000 sort of over the middle of the weekend. So I guess my first question is this telling us that crypto is a good space when there's so much dislocation elsewhere?
No, is the short answer. I view last week's relative strength as a combination of, a lot of risk clearing ahead of equities. And in addition to the fact that I do think that there was a strong corporate bid under, supporting the market last week in the form of GameStop and Marathon Digital. Have yet to confirm that, but that's my speculation.
Well, just actually, if you go into a corporate bid, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, so there is this increasing appetite for companies to put Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
Right.
You have pure plays like the MicroStrategies of the world. You have your diversifiers. These are the companies that allocate a specific portion of their balance sheet to Bitcoin. And that has created an appetite and it has brought another incremental buyer into the market to support Bitcoin price. It's been a major source of flows for Bitcoin. And I think we likely saw some of that occurring last week. We did end up seeing price roll over Sunday afternoon into futures open. And now we're kind of just ebbing and flowing with the latest headlines.
Before I want to turn to some of the broader questions in just a moment, but you said something I wanted to follow up on. Sunday afternoon was a big pullback in Bitcoin, and one of the things that Bitcoin is, the crypto I should say, is different than almost every other asset class is it trades 24/7. And as a former currency trader, I knew sometimes the most violent moves would happen when just New Zealand was open because there was half a dozen banks and there was really nobody else, and Asia wasn't really awake yet. Right. So in terms of crypto, how do you look at moves that happen during quite illiquid times? Because I would imagine on a comparative basis, what kind of volume do we see on a weekend versus a weekday?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is true, weekends are much more liquid. The volumes, I would say, it obviously varies. If there's a weekend on which there's a big geopolitical event, volumes can certainly sustain pretty high levels. But I would say normally on a, say, Saturday or Sunday, they're probably around 30% of weekday volumes, which is not insignificant.
Yeah.
But certainly any major moves that happen over the weekend, not that you should take them with a grain of salt, but it's important context to deliver. Order books generally as of late have been pretty bereft of activity. Volumes have been quite low. Volumes overall have been, or flows rather, have been quite muted. So yeah, but to answer your question, right, it's much more liquid on the weekends.
And generally, what part of the day is actually it's most liquid? Is it sort of when Europe and the US are in, or is it when Asia and Europe? What part of the day do we still see the lion's share of the volume?
Yeah, generally it's during US market hours and often during that overlapping period between US and New York and London. That's normally the most liquid time. It's the most liquid time of day.
So you mentioned the corporate buying just a little bit earlier, and the most famous, I suppose, is MicroStrategy. I guess Michael Saylor started this sort of the whole thing, done very well with it. Perhaps a little painful right now. But do you sense that there are corporate bids that are sort of stacked on the way down? Is that how does that work? Is there a lot of dry powder in terms of if Bitcoin, or I guess Bitcoin is sort of primary benefactor of this, as it goes lower, are there sort of corporate and bids layered down on the way
That's
down?
A great question. No, that's not, and that's why I kind of framed last week as the corporate bid supporting price, and it almost frames it as inorganic because it kind of is. They're very price indiscriminate, and whether their bid exists or not depends a lot upon how capital markets overall are viewing the prospects for Bitcoin, and the prospects for Bitcoin related equities. So for instance, if the market is expecting further upside in MicroStrategy and Bitcoin by extension, MicroStrategy will trade at a premium to the value of the Bitcoin held on their balance sheet. That will allow them to either sell stock or issue notes into the market to raise capital, and they'll look to deploy that immediately, just so there isn't any kind of mismatch and price doesn't get away from them. Because they're not really in the business of trading markets. They're in the business of issuing equity at a premium to buy Bitcoin. It's a great model, but it does kind of preclude them from timing the markets and having stacked bids, as you alluded to.
MicroStrategy, have they been pretty active, or as far as you can tell?
So they have been active. It looks like they actually were not active last week. They were active the weeks prior. They acquired, I believe, about $2.5 billion in Bitcoin over the preceding 2 weeks leading up to March 30th. And that was financed through the issuance of preferred stock and I believe some common equity.
How quickly can you tell that, after they've bought, that they've actually bought? Like, how fast does that turn around when the market knows?
Well, Saylor announces his buys on a weekly basis, and so that's like the confirmation that you're looking for. But oftentimes, if you see intraday dislocations with other assets, because everything has been so correlated lately given the ongoing trade war. So if you see a big dislocation between Bitcoin and, say, the NASDAQ, that likely intimates that you are there's someone in the market,
a corporate bid
right?
in the market.
A corporate bid in the market, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and once that bid disappears, like I think it did over the weekend, it just becomes very apparent based on volumes data and price action.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Bitcoin MicroStrategy, one of the biggest holders, is levered in a certain way, right? Is there any point at which, I don't know exactly what it is, like the average, the market guesses what his average cost of the Bitcoin he holds is. Is there any point in time where like somebody that like a MicroStrategy could get into trouble?
There's never say never. There's not 100% certainty that they can never get in trouble. There is a provision in their debt documents that if there is a material change in the business, I think that note holders and pref shareholders can force a redemption. However, unlike in years past when some of the Bitcoin was actually used as collateral for the loan, that is no longer the case. Now all of the Bitcoin on their balance sheet is unencumbered, and there's no liquidation price like there have been in years past. Of course, they have just issued cash earning pref shares, which I think is something that will need to be contended with, because I believe the current annualized coupon payments on those pref shares is something like 60-70 million. And their opco doesn't necessarily generate that much cash from what I can tell. And so perhaps there could be a world in which shareholders get upset with the amount of equity they have to issue. I'm just kind of like putting out hypotheticals here, that the board can perhaps force some kind of Bitcoin sale and subsequent redemption. But in terms of getting margin called, that's not a huge concern of mine.
That's really good to know in terms of they're no longer collateralized with Bitcoin.
Right.
It's that they do have to make, I suppose it's interest payments on the debt or preferred shares, and that's probably doable. And if you're a holder of those, you probably don't want to force liquidations. That worked for a bad headline.
Yeah.
In terms of some of the other Bitcoin still dominates the space, but I noticed Ethereum and Solana, they've had pretty much of a rough time now. Do you think so far that's justified, or I know I'm looking at a chart and those have corrected so much more than Bitcoin. Is there value, like real serious value, in other parts of the ecosystem because of the drawdowns associated with other markets?
Yeah, I think so. And if not yet, we're getting to those levels pretty soon. Look, I think I would the traditional market proxy for altcoins are, I would say, small caps, and those are down, 35, 40%, something like that from all-time highs, and have underperformed large caps. And so I think you see a very similar dynamic happening in both crypto and traditional markets. But we are getting into a level where I think there will be a lot of opportunities to start to accumulate some alts at reasonable prices and look to turn those alts into 5-10x's over 12, 24 months.
And what are some of these altcoins?
Yeah, look, I like Solana. I think it's obviously been the center of a lot of attention for both good and bad reasons, but I think that there is a lot of fundamental traction from very reputable application developers on Solana. I think people like to use the chain. It's got some regulatory tailwinds from impending ETF approval, and it just went through a very significant unlock. And I think once that supply clears, it's going to have a lot of upside. ETH, I'm less intrigued by. I think it's getting to hold your nose and buy level, just how bad it's done against Bitcoin this cycle. But it's still suffering from that middle child syndrome where they don't really have an identity. They try to compete with Bitcoin, they lose on the hard money front. They try to compete with Solana, they lose on level of performance. And so it's still in a tough spot. I do think that there will be opportunities for a rebound there, but it's just a tough sell at this point.
You mentioned the Solana ETF approval, and it looks like it's going to be a lot. This administration is certainly likely to be a lot friendlier than the previous one. Do we have a sort of a time frame of when you think that might come? I mean, it's sort of gotten lost in the shuffle. And,
certainly not investor priority right now. Right. But look, I should say that all of the opportunities in the crypto market, I think, are contingent upon us turning a corner on the trade war front. I mean, that's clear as day. We're going to ebb and flow and have opportunities ahead of us based on how this plays out. But in terms of timeline, I think right now it's looking like Q4, early Q4 probably for that ETF. So hopefully things are trending in the right direction by that time.
How big do you think, I mean, maybe you can compare it to when Bitcoin became tradable as an ETF. What kind of impact would the Solana ETF have? Would it be quite significant that gives investors, your ordinary investor who wants to see it on their brokerage statement, that they can do a Solana ETF? Do you think that's going to be a sort of a big rollout?
I think so. I don't think an ETF in and of itself produces demand, but it can unlock latent demand that perhaps the incremental buyer can unlock that incremental buyer who doesn't want to move outside of their Fidelity account to get exposure to an asset. But it's not going to create demand, I don't think. But I do think that there is strong demand for Solana from both retail and certain institutions.
There was some talk, and I think it was sort of put on the back burner of potentially a Bitcoin reserve, and that died down because I think they said we're not going to sell any Bitcoin that we recover from whatever investigation or not, but we're at least not going to accumulate any Bitcoin. That's the last I've heard of it. Has there been any sort of news or any kind of murmurs on potentially a Bitcoin reserve by either the United States or I guess anybody meaningful in terms of a new sort of holding something other than dollars, perhaps?
Yeah, so I mean that's another reason why we were somewhat cautious. Turned pretty cautious, back in February. In addition to the trade war, there really wasn't any identifiable catalyst for crypto in the near term. I think that one of the catalysts outside of just macro stuff will be some clarity around what the admin actually plans to do to build up the reserves, because it does sound like as the executive order was written, that they do want to hear viable budget neutral ways to acquire Bitcoin. And so if we have the Treasury come out and discuss some of those ways, that could get the market excited and perhaps start to front run a U.S. bid. But we don't know. We don't have any information on that just yet.
Long ago, but it certainly seems a long time ago that meme coins were kind of a big thing, and I think the last time we spoke, it's like a call option, like a call option with no expiration. I think is the way that you characterized it. It's sort of certainly in this tumult, but is the meme coin sector kind of very quiet? So quiet, in fact, there may be some opportunities if you're very knowledgeable and very careful.
Yeah, look, I think that the meme coin craze that we specifically saw leading up to the Trump coin launch I'm not positive that that environment is going to return again. And just to rehash my view on meme coins, I think that some of the more established memes, like a Dogecoin, would, you can view those as kind of a perpetual call option on retail speculation. The rest, the more longer tail meme coins are more akin to an online casino. Yeah, look, I think that has probably dried up for a little bit. I think that a lot of people got burnt towards the end of that meme coin craze, and as a result, we saw a lot of capital kind of take their ball and go home from that area of the market. And I just don't think we're anywhere close to achieving the animal spirits in the crypto market right now to achieve that kind of meme coin frenzy.
So anything other than Dogecoin, any other meme coins that are worth sort of even taking a flyer on, I guess?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, I guess on Solana, we like Bonk. That's kind of the dog coin on Solana. So I don't know if it's earned the blue chip status moniker just yet, but I think it's likely to be the Doge on Solana.
It's fun while it lasted, right? But
that's for sure.
So something that got the president of Argentina in trouble.
Yes, it sure did. Sure did.
Hopefully he survives it. I think he's doing good things. Yeah, just look. I wanted to ask you sort of a tactical trading question. Bitcoin's down, but Solana's been down a little bit more. Is this a good time to sort of, I guess, do the cross? Take some Bitcoin proceeds, transfer them into Solana as a cross, with the idea that the bounce in Solana, at least in the short term, we get some stabilization, could be more substantial than a rally in Bitcoin. So is it worthwhile doing a cross like that?
Yeah, I think. It's tough. I like to see altcoins form a bottom and get a little bit of upwards momentum before, getting too confident on BTC pairs. Just because, alts can, Bitcoin, you have levels, like there's going to be someone bidding 60K, 50K all the way down. With alts, you can move farther and faster in both directions than I think many appreciate. But that said, I do think to double back on what I'm saying, I do think we're getting to value territory for some of these alts, and that's not a bad idea. I think what we're just trying to get our heads around right now is what is the end game for this trade war? We think that there's going to be a deal that gets done, in which case, if it gets done soon enough, we'll see a pretty strong reversal in a lot of these coins. But the longer this goes on, the more deleterious effects it has on the economy. And obviously on the other side of that, there's fiscal monetary stimulus that helps out Bitcoin. But in a downturn, assets are pretty closely correlated. And so I don't think that would be a great environment for crypto. So it's really just getting a handle on the path forward out of this tariff morass that we're in right now.
Now we've talked about Solana and ETH as the and altcoins. Are there any alts that we should be paying attention to, like sort of the bigger ones that we just haven't mentioned?
Yeah, I really like JTO. Ticker's JTO. It's a critical piece of infrastructure on Solana. So they provide a number of a few products. One is very critical transaction ordering and execution software. Another is it's a liquid staking protocol, so you can stake your Solana, but also use it in DeFi and whatnot. And they also have a restaking protocol that they offer, and that's actually gotten battered pretty hard in the most recent sell-off. And so I actually think it's entering territory where I think it's good to start picking up some chips for a long-term bag. Beyond that, I think there's a lot of exciting things happening in the DPIN category. So that's decentralized internet physical infrastructure. One project I've been looking at lately it's called GEOD. Ticker is GEOD. But it's a good example of a Web3 protocol that is generating actual revenue and accruing that revenue to the token. And just the elevator pitch is that it is a token incentivized network of geo-positioning nodes. And so you have people that need precise positioning data. Like you think like agriculture, drones, stuff like that. The way it normally works is that you have these companies provide these very expensive radio towers and position them around, and it's very CapEx intensive, but this actually creates a tokenized network such that you can buy a smaller node, place it above your home, and get incentive and get compensated with token emissions. And so that's a way to turn a very CapEx intensive business into a capital light business. You know, there's clearly a lot of demand for using the network, and whenever anybody uses the network, the token, part of the token supply gets burned. And so that's another project that's caught my eye. It's a small cap, but I think there's going to be a lot of projects in that area that start to gain a little more attention now that we're approaching a time when there's going to be, you know, market structure bill, stablecoin bill, and real move towards accruing value to tokens.
Great. That's some interesting things to look into.
Yeah.
And last question, just as the last part of the question before we open up for questions from the audience. Hard one, I know, all things being equal, your sort of 3-month range for Bitcoin and year end for Bitcoin. Just rough thoughts.
Yeah, so we haven't officially changed our year-end target, and I don't want to do that before, you know, advising our clients. So we're going to stick with the 175K, but I think you can read between the lines that there might be an adjustment made to that. In the next 3 months, I think, you know, I'm looking for this mid-70s range was kind of what I was looking for to get involved again. And so, you know, I think this is a good place to perhaps bid. And, you know, my upside, you know, I'd look to see if we can challenge that, you know, 100K upside range over the next 3 months, give or take. But again, it really comes down to some kind of deal getting across the finish line as it pertains to tariffs.
Thanks for your good information. If I start to invest Bitcoin the first time, could you tell me any advice?
Buy low, sell high. I think the way, if it's for your first time, you're not a big trader and not trying to time the market all that much, I would just pick a percent allocation within your portfolio and just commit to rebalancing over, you know, whether it be monthly or quarterly, and you know, over the long term, you'll probably find yourself outperforming.
The first question was, you mentioned about like the corporates are buying Bitcoins right now. So how do they buy those Bitcoins, and what are the market they enter? For instance, do they outsource, or do they just buy directly, or do they ask for a Bitcoin trader, or he wants to know the roots of the purchase?
Yeah, so I mean, they normally contract with an exchange, or like a trading desk on an exchange, and will say, you know, hire someone to, you know, put together a TWAP over X number of days for Y amount of money, and yeah, they outsource. I guess is the simple answer.
And the second question was, do you think that the RWA is viable? Like, there was a recent cases that BlackRock is making a lot of investments in the RWA. Do you think it's like a viable stance in the market?
Yeah, no, great question. And that's actually, I probably should have brought that theme up. That's something I'm starting to pay a lot more attention to. You know, Larry Fink has said he's very interested in it. I think that there are going to be a lot of advances in settlement and just overall user experience and cost savings from bringing traditional assets on chain. We already have proof positive of this being beneficial in the form of stable coins, which are, you know, RWAs, but people don't think of them like that because they're just a dollar. But I think you're going to get a big effort to bring real world assets on chain, and it's going to be interesting because that makes a lot of the infrastructure that has been built over the past decade in crypto a lot more valuable, right? Because you're going to have a lot more mission critical things being exchanged on chain. And so, yeah, I do think that is a huge tailwind for the space and something to pay attention to.
So there were like many rumors that the U.S. government will officially use like the coins as their formal asset, so like leverage the coins as like the main asset in their budget. So, but what do you think about that? Like, do you think it will be confirmed, or is it just a rumor that's happening nowadays?
Oh, as like a reserve asset.
Yeah, like a reserve asset. Do you think that's like a viable statement that people can trust on?
Yeah, look, I think so. Every promise the Trump admin has made about crypto, I mean, they've followed through on. And there was language in the executive order related to the Bitcoin reserve that seeks to find methods through which they can acquire additional Bitcoin in addition to the Bitcoin that they're just holding on to. So I do think that there is a decent chance that we see the US government find a way to acquire Bitcoin sometime in the future.
He asked about the insights on Connie or MSTU.
The leverage ETF?
Yeah.
I have no comments on those. I do think that it's interesting, the market structure, the effects that those ETFs have on market structure, because when you see flows into MSTU, they've gotten to a size where like trading desks won't underwrite swaps for those leverage ETFs, so they actually have to go and bid in the options market, and that's created a lot of like pretty insane moves in volatility, which has created subsequent opportunities for MicroStrategy to issue a lot of equity and convertible notes at a premium. But yeah, sorry, going back to the initial question, you get a lot of they're great if you want to trade over short time periods. I don't think I'd ever necessarily recommend one, because you get a lot of unexpected moves, and the performance doesn't always track. You get a lot of decay in performance with those leverage ETFs as well, which is something to be conscious of.
So because the last question was, he wanted to ask personally whether you own Bitcoins, and if so, like, what is the ratio of Bitcoins and altcoins that you?
Yeah, I own Bitcoin, and it'd be a little weird if I was telling people to invest in crypto and didn't own any Bitcoin. Yeah, I guess right now in terms of I'm pretty cashed up right now, and I have been for a little while. I would say my crypto portfolio is mostly Bitcoin right now. It's just been a tough time for alts. I would say right now I'm probably like 50% cash, 50% Bitcoin, very few alts. I could foresee that changing.
Is it trackable, like how much Bitcoins that every country has?
Yeah, no, you can track the wallets. Yeah, there's I forget the exact statistic, but something like 5% of all Bitcoin are currently being held by nation states.
And how do you think that situation will impact the U.S. government policy?
Well, I mean, it's that's the nature of technology. You see the same thing playing out in artificial intelligence, where you can try and run from technology, stifle it like Europe does. But if you don't seize the moment and compete in a certain vertical of technology, your adversaries will. And I think you probably see the same setup with China, where I don't think that China competing in crypto should dissuade the US from competing in crypto. If anything, it should persuade them to increase their efforts in crypto.
So he asked about the prospect of Bitcoins in China. So he asked this because he's suffering almost 80% loss in investing in Chinese Bitcoin market. Okay. So what are your prospects of the Chinese market in general? Yeah,
I'm sorry, wait. Just can we clarify the details here? Is he trying to sell me equity right now?
No, he's trying to ask is there any opportunities for Chinese market to outbound?
That's tough, man. I mean, the Chinese market's a black box, right? And it could shift at a moment's notice. I do think that there is a decent amount of black and gray market activity that happens. I think there's a lot of Bitcoin mining that happens in China, especially with all of their cheap hydropower electricity. There's clearly a very large OTC market for Bitcoin, and people use Bitcoin for capital flight. Would I necessarily invest in a crypto-related company in China? I don't know, just because you can't really price that level of policy risk. I will say it does seem like, just if we're talking about different countries in Asia to invest in, I've been pretty happy with what I've seen in Japan recently. They recently lowered the tax rate on crypto transactions to be in line with financial instruments. And it does seem like they're looking to embrace crypto a little more. So that's been encouraging. I don't have a strong view on Korea and crypto, but I probably should. But yeah, I don't know if I would jump into the Chinese market.
Thank you. Thanks again, and look forward to our next conversation.
All right, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right.